You can see all of a sudden we went high tech up here with my husband. As you get to know me, you will learn that I'm a person who wants to believe in the good of everybody. When I meet someone, I hope to see and find the light and what is good about them. In fact, I am that annoying person who makes conversation with pretty much everyone who is nearby. It's a family trait. My mother and father both spent all of their lives talking to strangers, telling stories, and making friends in unlikely places. And as someone who finds the authority to preach a very sacred call, I found myself trying to figure out a way during my run last Sunday evening of examining and really praying what message God calls me to share with you at this time in the midst of everything that is happening in my life. You see, it isn't fair for me to get caught up in the realities of my life that I miss sharing with you what we are called as this community to hear. I did not want our journey together to get lost in the middle of ordering flowers and creating remembrance videos. But at the same time, there's no way I can stand in this pulpit this Sunday morning and not come with an awareness that I cannot separate the experiences from this last week with the sermon and message today. So I was running. And as I ran, I thought, I prayed, I thought some more, and I actually found myself beginning to feel stronger. There was something deep inside me that started to be connected to all the thoughts that were in my head. I was thinking about my dad, this church, and the bigger images of those I love in the church community, the women and my camp friends. It was all really kind of flowing through me with this deep sense of connectedness as sweat started to pour down my face. And I thought about what are the lessons that might actually resonate from this pulpit that my father taught me that would be relevant to what we need to hear and what God has called us to hear. And it finally came to me. You see, my father taught me one of the most difficult lessons in life. It is this: there are many stupid people. Now, as a person who wants to see the good in most people and give them the benefit of the doubt, I have always kind of struggled with the blunt way he would say this. It seemed kind of cruel and unjust, and at the same time, though, over the past week, I quickly discovered there are people who respond in much better ways at the pinnacle points of life. It isn't that a lot of people don't mean well, but there are many people who live in cliches or don't understand the importance of just simple presence. And it doesn't make them stupid, as my father would say. It just doesn't quite make them connected. You see, the sweat continued to pour as I ran, and the inner strength within me felt God's voice reword the harshness of what my father taught me. You see, while I see the good in most people, there are some people that I would call salt. They are the people who know how to season life in ways that are sacred, holy, and life-giving. They find the inner strength in themselves and others when a run or life or even the world in general gets difficult. They do not stick with simple recipes or fast food type responses. They come with their hearts, minds, and grace to provide comfort. And it isn't that they are better, they are just more grounded, connected, and real in the presence of hard moments of life. And you see, that became my hope for this church, that totally connected to what I want. I want us to be salt. A church where it doesn't take a bunch. Too much salt makes it not work either. But when you all of a sudden provide a taste, something a little bit more flavorful in a world where most people would choose sugar. I want something that is more lasting, more grounded, and connected even to nature. In a society where we have to watch our salt and sugar intake, salt can be seen as a negative, unhealthy, and physically damaging image. The salt that sits on our tables, however, is not the salt or the image that the Hebrews and Jesus had in their heads when they were making these statements. They didn't have soda pop to ruin our sodium intake or McDonald's French fries to heighten their cholesterol. Most of their understanding of salt came from what they knew of the Dead Sea, the heat, and the need for food preservation, not processing. Salt was a key ingredient for life. In fact, in many societies, salt was one of the primary currencies. I learned over the last week that the word salt and salary come from the same root word. Salt is seen as something as life-giving, and it provides a link that can be sacred because it helps things last over time. When Jesus spoke during the Sermon on the Mount the words, "You are the salt of the earth," he would have known the power this phrase would have had on the other Hebrews who were listening. This phrase was not something new and profound, but a reminder that for many generations, God has kept true to what the Hebrew people knew as the salt covenant with God, an everlasting promise between God and God's people that we are connected in holy ways. The Hebrew people even knew that their offerings back to God should include salt, as a remembrance that it's not just something they do to provide offering, but that it is something that is seasoned with something deeper and more lasting. That their offerings are more connected to God's promise, and there's a relationship and a response. Just like most promises and covenants with God, while at first it sounds like something that we can easily do, we quickly find ourselves not being able to fulfill them in a way that's really worthy of being salt of the earth. We find in our lives that we hope a chocolate bar will suffice when someone actually needs a meal. Someone needs something more lasting, more real, more holy. To offer the world something that is more holy and lasting is not easy. Over the past week, you may have seen some of the articles about the Disciples of Christ pastor, Dr. William Barber. Dr. Barber has been known over the past few years as one of the most prophetic voices that we have within our denomination and within the world. A few weeks ago, he was invited to be the keynote speaker for the Ecumenical Advocacy Days in Washington, D.C. He described his job at Advocacy Days to remind us of the similar moral teachings of all the great religions. Love your neighbor as yourself, do justice, and walk humbly with your God. When Dr. Barber got on the plane to return home from his engagement, he found himself very tired on a flight with someone behind him talking very loudly. The man began to say some cruel things, and after a flight attendant, upon Dr. Barber's request, asked the man to speak softer. So just imagine, because I was tired last night when I was typing out this story for you to hear. Dr. Barber is sitting there. He's actually bought 2 seats because he is a larger man and he has some physical disabilities. The man behind him is talking loud. He asked the flight attendant to ask him to talk softer. The man got mad that he was asked to talk softer and started to say, kind of rude things behind him. Well, Dr. Barber, because of his physical condition, had to stand up and finally literally stood up, turned around, and he's a big dominating presence, turned around and said, "Why are you saying such cruel things?" A few minutes later, Dr. Barber was escorted off the airplane. Why? Racism? Sexism? All of the above and more? And how does one like Dr. Barber respond to such a hurtful situation? A quick fix won't suffice. It might, but he's a much deeper salt type person. And in his statements, as he was explaining his experience, he said, here's what's important. The struggle against the hatred and fear take priority over the matters of my comfort and convenience. That is a salt response. In a world that usually chooses high fructose corn syrup items that provide comfort and convenience, he knew the ingredients and steps and much more challenging way to respond in a way that is sacred, holy, life-giving, long-lasting, and brings not more hatred and violence and hurt, but senses injustice and still finds ways to bring peace. So we must ask ourselves, how are we salt? While often in our lives it is easy to recognize the smart and good choices better than the choices of convenience, we still often find ourselves picking what is comfortable. We have to remind ourselves that as people of faith, comfort and convenience isn't always the answer. That God has called us to have hard work and faithful responses. It's hard work to work a video camera. As people of faith, we must work to find ways not to lose the flavor that makes our faith real and long-lasting, not trendy and short-term. Over the past week, there have been so many people with good intentions, but there have also been so many people who have been salt. My father-in-law flew up from Atlanta just to help with my kids this week. Talk about salt. He just went with the flow and watched them, and we only lost them once, which you've met my children. That's amazing. And last Saturday, I went to a women's retreat after finding out my father had died. Now, some people may find that this is strange, but for me, it made perfect sense. The disciples of Christ women had over and over provided me with faith opportunities and experiences that have taught me how to be salt. If you need something deeper and long-lasting, get a room full of 200 faithful women to pray for you, and God will provide you light in the time of darkness. And as some of you come back from Camp Wakondaho, I know that the one reason that you continue to venture there is because it is a sacred place to learn how to be, show, experience, and connect to God and others in ways that will provide salt to a world that doesn't feel balanced. And so I continue to seek in this crazy time ways to find salt in myself, salt in others, the salt in you. I think of those who taught me, like my father, how to be salt and how to provide others ways to be strong, active, life-altering, connected salt of the earth. Those like my children. I seek not to respond to everything that is happening with cliches and convenient answers or quick fixes. I do not choose to lose my saltiness, but to find ways to bring a sense of peace. Peace in the face of ongoing injustices, peace in the form of prayer, peace that is granted from a room full of women or singing bullfrogs next to a pond, peace even in the face of death and illness, peace that seems beyond myself, beyond all of us, and straight to a promise and connectedness to a story of a man who died on a cross and rose the third day, a man who knew what it meant to be salt and reminded all of us that, like salt, we are holy offerings in a deep, important, powerful relationship with God. Like a run, or maybe sitting and having a conflict on an airplane, or even in the midst of death. It isn't that people are stupid, but maybe they just don't know how to be holy, sacred, and be salt.